you have any particular big cat memories that stick out to you from your time at Taylor? Encounters or things you witnessed?
Yeah, there was one in particular. Around Christmas time, my wife was with me, and we decided to go and check on one of our camps up above Cave Creek on Big Creek. And it was cold. It was something like 16 degrees. We had a cold snap, and it was in the teens. And I remember we had um, this one camp above Cave Creek, and where we were spending a couple nights just to kind of thaw things out. And I got up in the early morning, and it was obviously cold. The stars were just like diamonds up there, twinkling, and there was enough light from those stars that they were just casting reflections off the crystals on the snow. And I walked out to relieve myself, and I saw some fresh cougar tracks in the right in front of the tent. And I walked back in, stoked up the fire, so my wife would have a warm tent to get out of the sack. And I said, Mona, there's some fresh cougar tracks out here in the snow. And I stoked the fire and stepped out again and looked down the trail to where I was, and there was a cat coming right towards us. It was or towards our tent. And it was not more than about 30 feet away. And it was just coming, sauntering up like it was not a fear of anything, but it had this real curiosity to it. And so I stepped out and I said, Mona, here it is. And it couldn't have been more than about 20 feet away at that time. And it sat down in the snow in the middle of the trail. And then all of a sudden it got back up and started walking right towards the tent. And it came within, right at the corner of the tent. And to be honest with you, I was a little bit, kind of fearful. Not, I've been around cats some, but when you encounter that kind of behavior, it's kind of daunting. And so we got into the tent, and I was expecting perhaps this cat might want to come into the tent. And so I grabbed the butcher knife and expecting it to come in the tent, and it didn't. As soon as the light, it became more light, I was able to stick my head out and discovered that from the tracks that there was 3 cats there. There was a mother and 2 year-and-a-half-old kittens. And the cougars, the offspring, stay with mom for about a year and a half until, the female's her size, and if there's a tom, and there was a tom offspring there, it's going to be way more than mom is. And she's, hangs on to her kids and teaches them the trade of being a good predator. And we caught those cats later that winter and put radio collars on them. And sure enough, that's what it was she, the mother, and a female offspring and a male offspring. I think he weighed about 140 pounds, where she weighed about 80 pounds, and the female offspring was similar weight, about 70 pounds or something like that. But we put collars on them and got to follow their travels, once they left mom. And the female, the kittens dispersed from the mother later that spring. The female went across Chamberlain, north of the Salmon River. It must have crossed the Salmon River in May, when the Salmon River's probably at flood stage. And but the cat crossed the river some point then, and the tom moved all the way and was later killed out of Drummond, Montana, which is like 160 miles away. And so that little glimpse of their behavior kind of instilled in me the first understandings of cat behavior, their sociology, their social behavior, and in fact how important that is to have that understanding in order to, if we're going to manage them, we're going to conserve them, to incorporate the cat behavior in that understanding about how to conserve, how to manage for cats on the landscape. Because what it means is that, the young males got to get out of the area, because the resident tom is going to make sure, because if he doesn't, he's going to, probably the young tom is going to get killed by the resident breeding tom. And that's life, that's part of competition. And that also stirs up the genetic pot, where the tom leaves the home area and takes that little packet of genes and distributes elsewhere into other populations, within hundreds of miles away. And I've observed this in my further cat studies, cougar studies, and bobcat studies, that this is an elemental part of their behavior and an essential part of their evolution, and a view that we must include in the understanding of managing and conserving these species, is that, there's a limit, basically, to the number of cats you can put on the landscape. And that is instilled in part by the big tom in the area, getting the young tom to move out, and that to minimize competition, and to essentially in the long term is to distribute the seeds from that population to a much wider area and to exchange genetics with a regional population. So in that experience there, I've seen very clearly from subsequent cougar research that I've been involved with in Cle Elum, Washington, where we had a cougar project we called Project Cat, Cougars and Teaching, where we involved the kids from the local school into the project. And we had marked family groups like that. And the young toms have to get out of Dodge, basically. And they will go hundreds of miles from their place of birth to establish a presence or territory elsewhere. And that territoriality that Morris identified and described in cougar in the 60s, he was the first to do so, is how important that understanding is into the management and the conservation of cougars. And unfortunately, a lot of management don't take those understandings when they're setting hunting season. They don't appreciate the behavior, those keystone bits of understanding about the evolution of these solitary carnivores, and into their management consideration, because there's a lot of thought now that cougars are overrunning the landscape, and there isn't that in the makeup of the evolution of cougars. They're a relatively low density species, and it's thanks to those big toms that keep the mix going. And that concept needs to be understood by managers and conservationists.